Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Here we are, August the 16th. Wow, amazing, isn't it? Hope you're having as much fun as I am. uh, I want to remind you that in just little over 2 months, okay, like I said, this August the 16th, and just slightly less than 2 months, I will be having a formal debate on the internet with Dr. Richard Carrier. Dr. Carrier is a very highly noted atheist. He he is quite a scholar, and so we will be debating whether or not Jesus's predictions of his coming failed. Dr. Richard Carrier says Jesus predicted his coming for the first century, and he openly admits that he posited his coming at the time of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that to be more than remarkable, more than amazing, and in my estimation, it kind of gives the farm away. So, be looking for that, October the 12th. There is an announcement of it on my website. I'll be renewing that announcement the closer that we get. The debate will be carried on Myth Vision on YouTube. We're expecting a large audience for that. And so again, be looking for that, October the 12th. That's on a Saturday. And I got to tell you, I'm just thrilled to death. I'm excited about this debate. The more people can see that the challenge of Christ is a serious issue. You know, here on this channel, here on Now TV, for the last few years, I have been sharing with you how important it is to be able to answer the challenge of Christ. What is that? Jesus said, "Do not believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Well, guess what? I'll be debating a man who says, okay, folks, Jesus said he was coming back in the first century, said he was going to come back, put an end to human history, put an end of time, destroy heaven and earth. He clearly didn't do that. Therefore, Jesus is a false prophet. Now, like I said, do you see how serious and important the challenge of Christ truly is? I've been sharing with you how important I believe that it is. Well, here's a guy, from everything that I know about him, he's a gentleman. Pardon me. But from everything I know about him, he is a scholar, but he sees the challenge of Christ in regard to eschatology, which has been the focus of our study and continues to be. He sees this as absolute, genuine proof that Jesus failed. He cannot be the Son of God. The Bible cannot be the Word of God. There is no inspiration. If you do not think, if you do not understand how critical it is that believers in Jesus Christ be able to answer this challenge, then we're going to see more and more of these skeptics attacking Christ, attacking the Bible, attacking Christianity, and saying, see, he didn't do what he said he was going to do, and according to his own words, we're not supposed to believe in him. Folks, do you catch the power of how important it is that we equip ourselves to understand biblical apocalyptic language? Just this morning, as I filmed this, okay, I've been reading a book, been reading it on and off, mostly off for a good little while. But since I'm assuming that Dr. Carrier will be following along in the path of the authors of this particular book, the book is entitled When the Stars Fall from Heaven. And these authors, just like Richard Carrier, say Jesus predicted his coming at the end of time to destroy physical creation. He didn't do it, therefore he's wrong. And it astounds me how, in my estimation, and I don't mean this in any way arrogantly, but it astounds me of how many philosophical, theological assumptions, presuppositional assumptions, are simply read right into the text, as these authors say. Oh, well, here's this given text, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very clear that a literal coming of the Lord is being discussed. A literal cosmic catastrophe is being discussed. Why is that clear? Well, only by ignoring the context of the very passages that they discussed is that quote clear. Now, I want you to know that this month, okay, I haven't announced it before this, but this month, August of 2024, U.S. orders only. My 2-book special is this: Who is this Babylon? And these are the days in which all things must be fulfilled. Now, if you ordered each of those books separately, you would pay $50. But for the month of August 2024, U.S. orders only, you can get both books delivered to your door, U.S. orders only, for $30. You're going to save $20. Now, why do I mention that? Am I simply interrupting here? No. I'm offering these books to show, because in each one of these books, I show that to literalize the language of Christ's coming on the clouds, with a shout, with the angels, in flaming fire, to destroy heaven and earth. In both of these books, I chronicle, I document how that language was never, ever intended to be taken literally. That means that those who claim Jesus was a false prophet because he didn't come and put an end to human history, they're misusing the language. Okay, I've got to hurry here. You know, every single week I run out of time before I'm even close to finish. But I kind of get wound up, in case you hadn't noticed. I kind of get wound up when I'm talking about the Word of God. And I particularly get wound up when I'm talking about the challenge of Christ and how the unbelieving world tries to use Jesus' own words against him. And the great bulk, the great majority of people who call themselves Christians have no clue whatsoever how to answer that challenge. That's why I keep saying this is absolutely critical. So last week, in our continuing study of 2 Peter chapter 3 and the last day of the Lord, all right, we've been going to Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. And we've been examining there that, number one, it was a prophecy of the last days. And number two, it was a prophecy of the day of the Lord. Now, let me read to you again some of the verses from Isaiah chapter 2, which discuss the day of the Lord. I'm going to begin reading with verse 9. Now, remember, the context, the temporal context of this prophecy is the last days. Isaiah was not living in the last days. Okay. The mean man will bow down. The great man humbles himself, therefore forgive them not. Why? Well, because they're involved in disobedience. Now watch. Enter into the rock. Hide in the dust for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up he shall be brought low. And, now watch this, and upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon the ships of Tarshish, and upon pleasant pictures. Folks, do you kind of get the idea here? This is a judgment upon Israel. I mean, after all, it's a judgment of the cedars of Lebanon, which is in the north part of Israel. If this is a depiction of the end of time, in which the earth and the elements that are therein, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, if that's what this passage is talking about when it's predicting the day of the Lord, why is he focused on Lebanon? And not only that, and this is particularly troublesome, by the way, for both the amillennialist and the postmillennialist. Now, remember, the amillennialist and the postmillennialist both tell us that God was through with Israel in the first century. Amillennialists, as a general rule, tell us God was through with Israel at the cross. Postmillennialists, at least many of them, agree with that assessment. Okay, but then they tell us that the last day's day of the Lord is the end of time. Okay, wait a minute. So for all of my amillennial and all of my postmillennial viewers, let me ask you this question. If God was through with Israel at the cross, or if, as a growing number of postmillennialists would agree, if God was through with Israel in AD 70, and yes, there are a growing number of postmillennialists who have radically changed their eschatology, realizing that no, God wasn't through with Israel at the cross. So here's the question. If God was through with Israel at the cross, or even in AD 70, why, in a prediction of the last day's day of the Lord, which is ostensibly a prediction of the end of time and the end of the Christian age, why is the focus on the destruction of Israel? I mean, after all, like I said, it is a prediction of the destruction of Lebanon and Bashan. Folks, those are not places in New York. Those are not places in America. Why, to reiterate the question, why is God concerned in this passage with a judgment on Israel in the last days, if God was through with Israel at the cross or in AD 70? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. And we're not even close to being through in seeing the focus of this judgment, this last day's day of the Lord judgment at the day of the Lord. It's all throughout Isaiah chapter 3. And it is undeniably, unequivocally, and irrefutably a focus on Israel and Jerusalem. This is incredible, folks. Okay, so let me continue reading now. Verse 19. And they, the subjects of this last day's day of the Lord judgment, they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. In that day, a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made, each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the mats, to go into the clefts of the rock and into the tops of the ragged rocks for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Wait a minute. Now, folks, I closed out last week by asking you to consider the following question. If the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending, last days, day of the Lord, how could anybody run to the hills, hide in the caves, cry on the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the day of the Lord. I mean, supposedly, that day would come and be over in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. The resurrection would. Well, the resurrection is the day of the Lord. How would anybody have time to run to the hills? You're not exactly, to depict this, you're not exactly going to be out in your front yard and you look up and say, oh, look, the day of the Lord. Honey, pack some things. We got to run to the hills. Quick, kids, come on, get out of the swimming pool. Come on, let's go. And honey, make sure I've got my rifle. And honey, make sure we got plenty of ammunition. Just make sure we got everything that we need. Toss it in the truck, and let's run to the hills somewhere. Let's see, where are we going to go? Oh, I don't know. We'll just drive until we find some place that's got caves, so that we can hide in the caves. Folks, do you see how ridiculous it is to posit that Isaiah, even though it's talking about a last days, day of the Lord, he cannot be speaking in any way, shape, form, or fashion of a literal end of the world, end of time event. But make no mistake, it is a last days, day of the Lord. Now, there's so much I've got to talk about on this, but we need to talk about this, what I'm calling the invisible day of the Lord. And why do I call it that? Well, because, if people are going into the mountains, hiding in the caves, it is not something that everybody in the world is going to personally see with their optical, physical, material eyes. Do you catch that? The reality of it is, ladies and gentlemen, and in this book that I mentioned a few moments ago, it astounds me of the flawed hermeneutic of these very erudite PhD scholars, and how flawed their hermeneutic is as they discuss this day of the Lord. Because they'll go through and they'll delineate and they'll say, well, this passage over here doesn't mention some of the constituent elements that are mentioned over here, therefore we don't have a right to conflate them. They may be speaking of different events. Now, folks, this is what you call a logical fallacy, and it's called it's called the negative fallacy. Negative fallacy. And that means that what they're saying is, well, this passage says the following. There are 4 constituent elements. This passage over here only lists 2 or 3. Although they're both talking about, the end, etc. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a massive hermeneutical issue here. So these same authors, and by the way, the man I'll be debating, Dr. Carrier, they are assuming that, or so far in reading the book, it seems that they're assuming, any reference to the day of the Lord is a reference to the end of time. And yet, at the same time, what do? Now remember, as far as these scholars are concerned, and let me throw this little caveat in there, so far as I've been able to determine in reading the book so far, all references to the day of the Lord, the time of the end, are referring to the same identical time and event, according to these men. And yet, these same identical scholars will go, okay, you got a passage here with X amount of constituent elements, it's the day of the Lord. You got another passage over here, it's the day of the Lord, but it omits several of these constituent elements, therefore they may be different events. Wait a minute, are they the same event or not? I mean, if you're going to argue that the day of the Lord is always the same, a reference to the same event, then you can't say, well, because this element is missing here, that must mean it's different from this over here. That's a massive, massive self-contradiction, folks. It just doesn't work. Okay, here's what I want you to see. Here is Isaiah predicting the last day of the Lord. And it is a prediction of a time when men could run to the hills, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us, hide us from the day of the Lord. I've got to repeat this. I know it's redundant, but I've got to repeat it. If the day of the Lord, if the last day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event in which the physical cosmos is destroyed, I'm sorry, folks, you can't run from it. You can't hide from it. If you go to the cave, into a cave, you're just going to be burned up. No escape. Now watch this. In Isaiah chapter 26, in discussing the resurrection, in discussing the day of the Lord in which the Lord would come out of heaven, tread on the tops of the mountains, and the mountains would be melted under his feet. You suppose that's the day of the Lord? Do you suppose that's the day in which he would rise to shake the earth mightily of Isaiah chapter 2? Well, of course it is. But watch this. In Isaiah chapter 26, verse 9 and following, O Lord, in the night my spirit within me will seek you early. For when your judgments are in the earth, the righteous will learn wisdom or righteousness. Let favor be shown to the wicked, and he will not learn from it. What? Let favor be shown to the wicked, and he will not learn righteousness. Now watch this. They, the wicked, will not see. It's an invisible coming of the Lord. It's an invisible resurrection, ladies and gentlemen. Now what? You just got to catch this. The very first time I ever saw this passage, I literally came up out of the chair going, holy cow. I began to grab commentaries. I got to see what the scholars throughout the ages have seen on this. John Calvin commenting on this passage, and let me go ahead and read a little bit more of it so you grasp the power of it. Let favor be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness he will deal unjustly and will not behold the majesty of the Lord. Well, wait a minute. Back here in chapter 2, 19 to 21, guess what? They're fleeing from the righteousness of the Lord, asking for deliverance from the righteous Lord. And yet here, they're not going to learn from it. They're going to see it, but they're not going to see it. Okay, verse 11. Lord, when your hand is lifted up, they will not see, but here's the kicker. Here's what John Calvin said, and I'll get that in just momentarily. When your hand is lifted up, they will not see, but they will see. And they will be ashamed for their envy at the people, yea, the fire of your enemies shall devour them. Oh, wait a minute. On the one hand, it says, Lord, when your hand is lifted up, they will not see it, but they will see it. So John Calvin, commenting on this passage, says, what this means is at the day of the Lord, the wicked will refuse to see, but at the very last, they will see and will realize what is going on. See, this is much like Matthew chapter 24, verse 37, in which Jesus is describing the impending fall of Jerusalem that would occur in that generation. And he said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they gave in marriage, and they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that the wicked in Noah's day did not know? I mean, after all, Noah, if we kind of conflate some passages together, it seems that Noah preached for 120 years. How can we even possibly say they didn't know? They didn't believe. So, Lord, when your judgments are in the earth, they will not see. In other words, they refuse to see that what God's judgments mean. It meant God was there. Very quick digression here. In Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, 82 times, 82 times, ladies and gentlemen, God would predict the judgment upon Tyre, upon Sidon, upon Egypt, upon Jerusalem, and Ezekiel chapter 25, as a matter of fact, lists something like 20 nations that God was about to bring judgment upon at the hands of the Babylonians. But God said, Nebuchadnezzar is the sword in my hand, and I will put my sword in his hand. Now, he didn't think that. He didn't realize he was God's instrument. But the point of fact is, he's my sword. And I'm going to put my sword in his hand. Okay. 82 times in predicting all of these different judgments upon all of these different nations. Point number one, they were called the day of the Lord. Point number two, God said that when he brought that judgment upon those nations, that he was going to do it so that then they may know that I am God. Okay, so what do you have? You have the righteous hearing the predictions of the coming judgment upon Egypt or, whatever nation. And when that came to pass by Babylon destroying those nations, the righteous would go, that's Yahweh. He was there. Yahweh came. And the wicked goes, what? What are you talking about? That's just Babylon. No. That was Yahweh in his sovereignty using this nation to judge this other nation. I'm completely out of time. I'll see you next week.